the night, the firefly, and the whispering woods. Hello there, my little listener. Come a little closer. That's it. Get nice and cozy. I have a story for you tonight. A story about a castle that wasn't quite what it seemed, and a knight who was afraid of something very surprising. In the heart of the whispering woods stood a grand old castle made of gray stone. It had tall, spiraling towers that tickled the clouds and a great heavy drawbridge. And in this castle lived a knight. His name was Sir Tim, but most everyone called him Tarnished Tim. Now that might sound a little mean, but it wasn't because he was a bad knight. Oh no. It was because his suit of armor, which had once been shining silver, was now covered in little spots and smudges. You see, Tim spent so much time hiding from things that made him nervous that he never got a chance to polish it. And what was it that made Tarnished Tim so nervous? It wasn't dragons. It wasn't fearsome trolls. It wasn't even the thought of a big, scary test. Tarnished Tim was afraid of shadows. Not just any shadows, but the long, dancing, leaping shadows inside his own castle. When the sun went down, the friendly castle by day became a place of mystery and movement by night. The shadow of a suit of armor looked like a silent giant. The shadow of a billowing curtain looked like a flapping ghost. And the shadow of a simple broom leaning against a wall looked like a spindly, many-armed monster. Every night, when the moon rose, Tarnished Tim would curl up in a ball inside his closet, surrounded by his softest blankets, and try to pretend the shadows weren't there. He would squeeze his eyes shut and wish for the sun to come back faster. Can you imagine being a big, strong knight who is scared of the dark? It made Tim feel very lonely. But one night, something was different. Tim was in his closet, hiding as usual, when he noticed something strange. Or rather, he noticed something that wasn't there. The usual silvery light of the moon that usually peeked under his door was gone. It was pitch black, and it was quiet. Too quiet. The crickets had stopped chirping. The wind had stopped rustling the leaves. The whole world was holding its breath. And then he heard it. It was the softest, most magical sound. It was a giggle. A tiny, tinkling, happy giggle that seemed to float on the air itself. It didn't sound scary at all. It sounded curious, and it was coming from deep within the castle gardens. Now, my little friend, what would you do if you heard a magical giggle in the middle of a very dark night? Would you hide even deeper under your blankets? Or would you be just a little bit curious? Tarnished Tim was very, very curious. For the first time in a long time, something was more interesting than his fear. He knew deep in his knightly heart that he had to find out where that giggle was coming from. He took a deep, shaky breath, pushed open the closet door, and tiptoed out into the dark hallway. The shadows seemed bigger and darker than ever without the moon. A suit of armor creaked, and Tim nearly jumped out of his own boots. He started to think this was a very bad idea. He was about to turn and run back to his closet when a new light appeared. It wasn't the moon. It was a small, bobbing, buzzing ball of light that zipped right past his nose. It was a firefly. But not just any firefly. This firefly shone brighter than any Tim had ever seen. His light was a brilliant, cheerful gold, and he zipped and zapped through the air like a tiny, excited comet. The firefly buzzed around Tim's helmet, his light reflecting off the tarnished metal. The little knight could tell the firefly was asking him a question. The firefly seemed to be wondering what a knight was doing, tiptoeing around his own castle in the middle of the night. Tim sighed a sigh that fogged up his visor. He explained in a wobbly voice that he was trying to be brave and follow the beautiful giggle, but that the shadows were making it very difficult. Well, the little firefly found that simply astonishing. He himself loved the dark. The dark was where his light shone the brightest. He buzzed with an enthusiastic energy, seeming to offer a deal. He would light the way for the knight if the knight would help him find the source of that fascinating giggle. He was very, very excited about the whole adventure. Tim, feeling a little boost of courage from his new tiny friend, agreed. He decided to call the firefly Blaze because his light was so strong and bright. And so the two new friends set off. A tarnished knight who feared the dark, and a brilliant firefly who loved it. They were a funny pair, but a good team. Blaze zipped ahead, his golden light pushing back the deepest, darkest shadows. He showed Tim that the giant shadow was just a suit of armor waiting for its polish. He showed him that the flapping ghost was just a curtain blowing in the night breeze. And he showed him that the many-armed monster was just a friendly broom, waiting to sweep the floors in the morning. With every shadow that became just a normal thing, Tim felt his heart grow a little lighter, and his armor feel a little less heavy. They followed the sound of the giggles all the way out of the castle, across the drawbridge and into the whispering woods. The trees were tall and ancient, and their leaves seemed to murmur secrets to one another. Blaze's light created a small, safe circle around them as they walked, and the giggles grew louder and more frequent. But the woods were full of challenges. The first challenge was the path of rustling leaves. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of dry, crunchy leaves. Every step Tim took sounded like a giant crackle of thunder in the quiet night. The giggles would stop whenever he made too much noise. He was trying so hard to be quiet, but his big, clunky night boots were not made for sneaking. Blaze, ever the helpful guide, flew down and landed on the toe of Tim's boot. His light seemed to be saying, "Watch me." Then Blaze flew slowly forward, tracing a path where the leaves were just a little thinner, a little damper, and wouldn't make so much noise. Tim watched carefully and then began to step exactly where Blaze had flown. He moved slowly, placing his feet with great care. And do you know what? The leaves only gave a soft, gentle sigh under his feet. They had passed the first challenge. The giggles started up again, leading them deeper into the woods. Soon they came to the second challenge. The creek of croaking concerns. A wide, babbling creek cut across their path. The water gurgled and splashed, and sitting on every rock and lily pad were dozens of frogs. They all stopped their croaking and stared at Tim and Blaze with big, unblinking eyes. They seemed very serious and concerned about two strangers crossing their creek. Tim looked for a bridge, but there was none. He looked for stepping stones, but they were too slippery and far apart for a knight in heavy armor. He felt a flicker of his old fear. What if he fell in? What if the water was deep? The shadows on the water looked deep and mysterious. Blaze, however, was not concerned at all. He zipped over to the oldest, biggest frog sitting on the grandest lily pad. He hovered in front of the frog, blinking his light in a friendly, polite pattern. It looked like he was having a very important conversation with the frog. The frog croaked a low, thoughtful croak. Blaze blinked again, dancing a little pattern in the air. It seemed Blaze was asking for permission to cross and promising they meant no harm. The big frog gave one final deep croak that sounded like an "okay," and all the other frogs joined in, creating a croaky chorus. Then something amazing happened. The frogs all lined up across the creek, creating a living, breathing bridge of green backs and friendly faces. Tim took a deep breath, trusted his new friends, and walked carefully across the frog bridge, one respectful step at a time. The frogs didn't mind one bit. They had passed the second challenge. The giggles were even louder now, and they noticed something else. The giggles seemed to be making the few remaining moonbeams that filtered through the trees shimmer and dance. Finally, they arrived at the very heart of the whispering woods. And there, in a wide, open clearing, stood the most magnificent tree any of them had ever seen. It was the grand elder tree, its trunk so wide it would take 20 knights holding hands to circle it, and its branches so high they seemed to hold up the sky itself. But the tree looked sad. Its leaves were drooping and its bark looked dull. And tangled in its highest branches was the reason the night was so dark. The moon itself, or at least its light, was caught there. It looked like a great, silvery ball of yarn that had been tangled and knotted in the branches. and only little scraps of light could drip down to the ground below. And sitting on a root at the base of the tree was the source of the giggles. It was a tiny shimmering creature made of starlight and curiosity. A wood sprite. She had been trying to free the moon's light, but her tiny hands could only untangle one tiny thread at a time, and every time she made a little progress, she would giggle with happiness. She looked up as Tim and Blaze approached. She wasn't scared. She just pointed up at the tangled moon and made a sad little sound, as if to say she needed help. This was it, the final challenge. Tim knew what he had to do. He had to climb the tree and free the moon. He puffed out his chest. He was a knight. This was a job for bravery and strength. He marched up to the tree, grabbed a low-hanging branch and gave it a mighty shake. "Do not worry," he boomed in his best knightly voice. "I, Sir Tim, will free the moon." But the tree did not like that. Not one bit. The shaking made the knots in the moon's light tighten even more. The branches seemed to creak in annoyance, and the few drips of moonlight stopped completely. The wood sprite covered her ears and looked upset. Blaze buzzed in a worried circle around Tim's head. This was not working. Tim tried again. He thought maybe he could roar at the knot to scare it loose. He took a huge breath and let out his biggest, most ferocious roar. Roar! The sound echoed through the clearing. But the roar didn't scare the knot. It scared the little wood sprite, who hid behind the root. It scared the frogs down by the creek, who all stopped croaking. And it made the grand elder tree tremble with displeasure, shaking the poor, tangled moonlight even harder. Tim had made everything worse. He hung his head. His strength and his roar were useless here. He felt like he had failed. But then he remembered his journey. He remembered how he got past the rustling leaves not by stomping, but by stepping gently. He remembered how he crossed the creek not by demanding, but by asking politely with Blaze's help. He had been solving problems with quietness and respect all night, not with noise and force. He looked at the great ancient tree. This wasn't a monster to be fought. It was a wise old elder. It deserved respect. He walked slowly up to the massive trunk. He didn't shake it. He didn't roar at it. He did something very different. He placed his tarnished metal hand gently on the rough bark of the tree. He bowed his head, and in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper, a voice he didn't even know he had, Sir Tim spoke to the tree. He apologized for his shouting and his shaking. He told the tree he was sorry its sleep had been disturbed. He explained very politely that everyone in the world missed the moon's gentle light. The night creatures needed it to see, the flowers needed it to sleep, and a little night sometimes needed it to feel safe. He promised to be gentle if the tree would help him. The clearing fell completely silent. The whole forest was listening. And then something magical happened. The grand elder tree began to glow from within its ancient trunk. A soft, green, gentle light. The tree had heard him. The knotted branches high above began to slowly, carefully untwist themselves. The knots in the moon's light loosened as if invisible fingers were gently unraveling them. Tim didn't need to climb. He didn't need to roar. He just needed to be kind and ask nicely. With a final soft sigh from the tree, the last knot came undone. The moon's light, finally free, poured down from the branches. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a gentle wave of silvery brightness that washed over the entire clearing, then the whole woods, and then the entire world. It filled the night with a beautiful, peaceful glow. The wood sprite burst out from behind the root, giggling and dancing in the moonlight, her own light glowing brighter than ever. Blaze zipped around in joyful loops, his golden light now mixed with the moon's silver. The frogs down at the creek began a happy, celebratory, croaking chorus. Tarnished Tim looked up at the moon, shining brightly in the sky where it belonged. He looked at his reflection in a still pool of water. His armor was still tarnished, but now, in the moonlight, the spots and smudges looked like a map of all the adventures he'd had that night. He wasn't Tarnished Tim anymore. He was just Tim, a knight who had learned that the bravest thing you can do is sometimes to speak with a whisper, not a roar. The wood sprite flew up to him and placed a tiny, glowing hand on his helmet. A little bit of her starlight magic transferred onto him, making one small spot on his shoulder shine like new. It was her way of saying thank you. Tim, Blaze, and the little sprite sat under the grand elder tree for a long while, just watching the moon and listening to the peaceful sounds of the woods. The shadows were still there, but they weren't scary anymore. They were just quiet parts of the beautiful moonlit night. When Tim finally walked back to his castle, with Blaze lighting the way and the moon watching over them, he didn't tiptoe. He walked tall. He knew that tomorrow he might still get a little nervous sometimes, and that was okay, because now he knew how to be brave in a different way. Aunties, what about our little firefly friend? Well, Blaze decided he quite liked having a knight for a best friend. He found a perfect little spot to sleep right inside the visor of Tim's helmet, which he thought was the coziest room in the whole castle. So the next time you see the moon shining brightly in the sky, remember the knight who whispered to a tree. And remember that even the smallest voice, when it is kind and respectful, can solve the biggest problems. But I wonder, my little listener, what other adventures await Sir Tim and Blaze? Perhaps a journey to the singing caves where the crystals hum, or a quest to find the source of the rainbow's colors. That is a story for another night. Sleep tight, and may your dreams be full of moonlight and gentle whispers. Moral: true courage is found not in loud roars, but in quiet whispers of kindness and respect.